It's been 73 days since the crash. 73 days since every screen in Chicago went black at exactly 3:47 p.m. on September 12th, 2031. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone when it happened, refreshing my bank app for the third time that afternoon, and the numbers just vanished. Not slowly, not with an error message, they just disappeared. The screen went dark, then showed nothing but a gray loading circle that spun forever, and then nothing at all. Dead. Completely dead. And I stood there on the corner of Michigan Avenue in East Walton, holding this useless piece of glass and metal, and I didn't understand. None of us understood. Not yet. The cloud evaporated. That's what they're calling it now. The few people who still talk about what happened in technical terms, the engineers and IT people who survived and who spend their time trying to explain the unexplainable. The cloud, that invisible digital space where everything we were existed, just collapsed. Every server farm, every data center, every backup system, every redundancy protocol, all of it failed simultaneously. Some people say it was a coordinated cyber attack. Some say it was solar flares that fried the infrastructure. Others claim it was an AI that achieved consciousness and decided to wipe us clean. I don't know what caused it. I don't think anyone really knows. What I know is that in the span of maybe 30 seconds, every piece of digital information on the planet ceased to exist. Your photos, your emails, your documents, your medical records, your bank accounts, your identity. Gone. All of it. Just gone. I watched a woman next to me try to unlock her Tesla. She pressed the app on her phone, then pressed it again, then started frantically tapping the screen. The car didn't respond. It couldn't respond. The app was dead. The car's computer was dead. Everything was dead. She started crying, right there in the parking garage, because she couldn't get into her $60,000 vehicle, couldn't even open the door. And I remember thinking how strange it was that she was crying over a car when my entire life savings had just vanished, when my bank account that showed $43,000 that morning now showed nothing at all, when the retirement fund I'd been building for 15 years no longer existed in any proofable way. But within an hour, we all understood. We all realized the scope of it. The phones stayed dark. The ATMs displayed error messages, then went blank. The traffic lights stopped working. The electronic billboards in Times Square, our version here in Chicago, all those massive screens along Michigan Avenue, they all went black. The L train stopped moving because the computerized systems that ran the entire transit network were fried. People were trapped in subway cars underground for hours. Some of them died down there in the dark, trampled or suffocated when panic set in.
The hospitals lost access to patient records, to prescription databases, to everything. Doctors didn't know who was allergic to what. They didn't know blood types. They didn't know medical histories. People died from receiving the wrong medication, from complications that could have been prevented if anyone had known their medical background. The psychological horror came later, after the initial shock wore off. That's when people started to realize what we'd lost. We'd built our entire sense of self on digital platforms. Our identities existed online. Who we were, what we'd accomplished, how we connected to other people. It was all mediated through screens. And when those screens went dark, people forgot who they were. I'm not being metaphorical. I mean, literally forgot. There was a man in my building, guy in his 30s, who had a complete breakdown on day 5 because he couldn't remember his own mother's phone number. He'd stored it in his contacts years ago and never memorized it, never had to. And now she lived in Seattle and he had no way to reach her, no way to know if she was alive, and he couldn't even remember the number. He sat in the hallway sobbing because the cloud had held that information, and now it was gone. We have no names anymore. We have the names we remember, the names we tell each other, but there's no way to prove any of it. My driver's license is a piece of plastic with my photo and some text, but the database that verified it doesn't exist. My birth certificate is in a filing cabinet somewhere in a government building that's probably been looted by now. My social security number, my credit score, my employment history, my educational transcripts, all of it lived in digital systems that are gone. I could tell you I'm a doctor. I could tell you I'm a convicted felon. I could tell you my name is anything I want it to be, and you'd have no way to verify it, no way to check. We're all just faces now, bodies, mouths that make sounds, and the sounds we make about who we used to be are just stories that can't be verified. The chaos in Chicago started on day 2, once people realized this wasn't a temporary outage. The Magnificent Mile became a war zone. And here's what's interesting. People weren't looting for electronics. They weren't stealing TVs or computers or phones. Because what's the point? Those things are useless now. They're just expensive paperweights. People were looting for coats, for food, for anything physical, anything real, anything that had value outside of a digital system. I watched a crowd tear through the Canada Goose store on Michigan Avenue, people fighting over winter jackets, because everyone suddenly realized that Chicago winter was coming and their smart thermostats weren't going to work. Those connected heating systems that you controlled with your phone? Dead. The ones that learned your schedule and adjusted automatically? Useless. And the temperature was already dropping at night.
September in Chicago, you can already feel autumn coming. And by October, he would be cold. And by November, he would be freezing. And by December, people would die if they didn't have heat. The grocery stores were emptied in 48 hours, not because people were hoarding, well, some were, but because the entire supply chain collapsed. Grocery stores don't keep much inventory on hand anymore. Everything was just-in-time delivery, managed by algorithms, tracked by digital systems. Trucks knew where to go because computers told them. Warehouses knew what to stock because data analytics predicted demand. And when all of that disappeared, the trucks stopped moving. The warehouses sat full of food that couldn't be distributed, and the stores ran out. I saw people fighting over cans of beans, over bags of rice, over anything with calories that wouldn't spoil. The meat section rotted within 3 days because the refrigeration systems failed, and no one knew how to fix them without consulting online manuals or calling tech support numbers that no longer worked. Paper money became worthless almost immediately. People tried to use cash at first, but what's cash? It's paper that we all agreed had value because a government said so, because a financial system backed it up, because you could deposit it in a bank or use it to pay bills online. But there are no banks anymore, not functionally. The buildings are still there, but they're locked and empty because the systems that tracked who owned what are gone. Your checking account, your savings account, your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card debt, all of it exists only as entries in databases that no longer exist. Some people are celebrating because their debts vanished. Others are crying because their savings vanished too. But paper money? People were burning it for warmth by week 3. I'm not exaggerating. I watched someone use $100 bills to start a fire in a trash can because paper money was more abundant than firewood and just as useless. Gold became currency. Actual physical gold. People started trading in jewelry, in gold coins, in anything precious and tangible. But more than gold, bullets became currency, ammunition, guns, anything that could protect you or feed you. I saw the sporting goods stores get looted on day 3. People weren't taking basketballs. They were taking hunting rifles and fishing rods and camping equipment, anything that could help you survive without electricity, without the internet, without the systems we'd built our lives around. A box of 9mm ammunition is worth more than $1,000 in paper money. A hunting rifle is worth more than a car, because the car doesn't work anyway, because you can't pump gas without electricity, and the gas stations all shut down when their payment systems died. The smart city became a prison. That's what Chicago was, a smart city, connected, optimized, efficient, every traffic light networked.
Every building integrated with IoT devices, every service dependent on digital infrastructure. And when that infrastructure failed, the city stopped functioning. The electric cars stopped working because they needed to connect to charging networks that didn't exist anymore. I saw thousands of Teslas and Rivians and electric vehicles just abandoned in the streets because they were dead weight. Couldn't charge them, couldn't even unlock some of them because the digital keys were in phones that didn't work. The smart locks on apartment buildings and condos, those keypad entry systems, those phone-based access controls, they all failed. People were locked out of their own homes, or locked inside. I heard about a family in the Gold Coast trapped in their penthouse for 6 days because the electronic lock on their door failed in the closed position and they couldn't override it. By the time someone broke in to help them, 2 of the 3 kids had died from dehydration. The violence started on day 4. Not random violence, desperate violence, purposeful violence. People fighting over paper records to prove they owned their houses. Because without digital records, without property databases, without title companies and deed registries, how do you prove you own anything? I watched neighbors who'd lived next to each other for years get into a screaming match over a property line because neither of them could pull up the survey records online. I watched a man beat another man unconscious with a crowbar because he claimed the house was his and he had a paper deed to prove it, but the other man also had a paper deed, and there was no way to verify which one was legitimate because the county records were digitized 20 years ago and the physical backups were in a warehouse somewhere that had burned down in the first week of looting. The elderly died first. They died in their homes because their medical alert systems didn't work. They died because they couldn't remember their medications without digital reminders. They died because they couldn't call for help when they fell or had strokes or heart attacks. The disabled died too. Anyone dependent on electric wheelchairs or powered medical devices. Anyone who needed regular dialysis at clinics that couldn't function without power and computers. The hospitals tried, but they were overwhelmed within days. Without patient records, without the ability to order medications from digital pharmacies, without the diagnostic equipment that required software updates and cloud connectivity, doctors were practicing medicine like it was the 19th century, and people died. Thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands just in Chicago alone. The children suffered in a different way. The kids who'd grown up with tablets and phones and constant connectivity, they didn't know how to entertain themselves without screens. They didn't know how to read physical books because they'd only ever read on devices.
They didn't know how to play games that weren't digital. And the teenagers, God, the teenagers were the worst off. Their entire social existence had been online. Their friendships, their relationships, their sense of self-worth, all of it mediated through social media platforms that no longer existed. I watched a 16-year-old girl have a complete mental breakdown because her entire life, every photo, every message, every memory she'd created since she was 10 years old was gone. She couldn't remember her friends' last names. She couldn't remember the name of the boy she'd been dating for 2 years because she'd only ever known him by his Instagram handle. She couldn't remember what she looked like before she started using filters on every photo. Her identity had been curated and stored digitally, and now it was gone, and she didn't know who she was without it. The professional class collapsed immediately. The lawyers, the accountants, the financial advisors, the consultants, everyone whose work existed primarily in digital space. What's a lawyer without access to legal databases? What's an accountant without access to financial records? What's a stockbroker when the stock market no longer exists in any functional form? These people had spent decades building careers that required constant connectivity, and overnight those careers became meaningless. I knew a corporate attorney who made $400,000 a year. Within 2 weeks, he was begging for food because the skills he'd spent his entire adult life developing were useless in a world without computers. He couldn't farm, he couldn't build, he couldn't fix anything. He could draft contracts and argue precedents and navigate complex regulatory frameworks, but none of that mattered anymore because the legal system had collapsed along with everything else. The working class, the tradespeople, they adapted better. The plumbers and electricians and carpenters, the mechanics and welders and HVAC technicians, people who worked with their hands, who had skills that existed outside of digital space. They became the new elite. A plumber who could fix a burst pipe without looking up instructions online was worth more than a software engineer. A carpenter who could build shelter without power tools was more valuable than a data scientist. The hierarchy inverted almost overnight. The knowledge economy disappeared because knowledge without the ability to access, store, and transmit it digitally is just whatever you can hold in your head. And most of us had stopped holding anything in our heads because we'd outsourced our memories to the cloud. Winter is coming. It's late October now, and the temperature is dropping, and people are terrified because Chicago winter is brutal, and most of the heating systems in the city don't work. The old buildings with radiators and boilers, they might be okay if someone can figure out how to operate them manually.
But the new buildings, the modern luxury condos and apartments with digital climate control and electric heating, they're going to be death traps. People are already starting to migrate, heading south, trying to get somewhere warmer before the snow starts. But the roads are clogged with abandoned cars and the gas stations don't work, and there are gangs setting up checkpoints on the highways, demanding tolls and food or ammunition or gold. Leaving isn't safe. Staying isn't safe. There are no safe options anymore. The government tried to respond. In the first week, you could still see military vehicles, National Guard troops trying to maintain order, but they were overwhelmed immediately, and their own command and control systems had failed. They couldn't communicate effectively without digital networks. They couldn't coordinate operations without computers. And a lot of them deserted within the first 2 weeks because they were worried about their own families. Because the promise of a paycheck doesn't mean anything when the banking system has collapsed and money is worthless. I haven't seen anyone in uniform in over a month. I think the government, at least at the local and state level, has ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Maybe there's something happening in Washington. Maybe there's a federal response. But we wouldn't know. We can't know, because there's no way to communicate beyond shouting distance. Some people are trying to rebuild, trying to create local networks using ham radios and written messages, trying to organize communities around physical resources and mutual aid. There are neighborhoods that have banded together, that have created security patrols and rationing systems and rules about resource distribution. But there are also neighborhoods that have descended into complete anarchy, where it's gang rule and might makes right, and you don't go out after dark unless you want to die. Chicago has fractured into 1,000 little fiefdoms, each with its own rules, its own economy, its own power structure. And there's no overarching system to hold it together, because the systems we built were all digital, and they're all gone. I think about the warning signs we ignored, how dependent we'd become on technology, how we digitized everything without maintaining physical backups, how we'd built smart cities without considering what would happen if the intelligence disappeared, how we'd moved all of our money, all of our records, all of our identities into cloud storage, without understanding that the cloud was just someone else's computer, and those computers could fail. We were warned. People talked about cyber vulnerabilities, about the fragility of interconnected systems, about the risks of putting all our eggs in one digital basket.
And we nodded and said we'd implement better security and redundancy, and then we kept doing exactly what we'd been doing, because it was convenient and efficient, and we couldn't imagine a scenario where it would all just stop working. But it did stop. It all stopped. And now we're living in the aftermath, learning how to survive without the tools we'd come to rely on, relearning skills our grandparents knew, but we'd forgotten because we didn't need them anymore. How to preserve food without refrigeration, how to navigate without GPS, how to tell time without checking your phone, how to remember things without storing them digitally, how to trust people without being able to look up their backgrounds online, how to build communities face-to-face instead of through screens. If you're hearing this, and I don't know how you would be, but if somehow you are, I want you to understand something. Your digital life is not your real life. Your followers don't matter. Your credit score doesn't matter. Your cloud storage doesn't matter. What matters is what you can do with your hands, what you know in your head, what you've built in the physical world. Keep physical copies of everything important, your birth certificate, your property deeds, your medical records. Print them, store them somewhere safe. Learn a trade, learn how to grow food, learn how to fix things, learn how to defend yourself. Because the screen can go black, the cloud can evaporate, the systems can fail. And when they do, the only thing that will save you is what you actually know and what you can actually do. I survived the digital crash because I got lucky, because I lived in a building with old radiators, because I had some camping gear from a trip I took 5 years ago, because I knew how to start a fire without looking up instructions, because I had physical books to read, because I still knew how to talk to people face to face. But it was still luck. Most people weren't lucky. Most people died or suffered or lost everything. And the ones who survived are living in a world that's harder and crueler and more dangerous than anything we'd experienced in our lifetimes. The screens are still dark. They've been dark for 73 days. And I don't think they're coming back on. I think this is permanent. I think we've lost the digital world forever. And now we have to figure out how to live in the physical world again. How to be human again, without the interfaces and algorithms and artificial intelligence that we'd let mediate our existence. It's terrifying. It's brutal. It's lonely. But it's real. For the first time in decades, everything is brutally, undeniably real. And that might be the only honest thing to come out of this catastrophe. We're real again. We're physical again. We matter because we're here, not because of how many likes we got or what our profile said about us. We're just people, trying to survive, trying to remember who we were before the screens.
Trying to build something that doesn't depend on systems that can disappear in 30 seconds. That's what Chicago looks like now. That's what the digital crash did to us. And if you're smart, if you're listening, if you're preparing, learn from our mistakes.
Because this could happen anywhere. This could happen to you. And when it does, your follower count won't save you. Your digital portfolio won't save you. Your smart home won't save you. The only thing that will save you is what you know and what you can do, and what you've prepared for in the physical world. The screen went black, and we forgot who we were. Don't let that happen to you.